It's the final of the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge Knockout Tournament. And we have Hikaru Nakamura playing Daniel Dubov. We're into the second day. Hikaru Nakamura won the first set of 4 games, 2.5, 1.5. And so that meant that Daniel Dubov had to equalise in the second set of 4 games. Remember, Hikaru Nakamura in tremendous form at the moment, showing why he is one of the most feared players online. He dumped out the world champion Magnus Carlsen in the semi-final, and he goes into this final as favourite, and he certainly looked good on the first day, winning the first 2 games. So Dubov had to win this set of 4 games today. So with black, well, he's played a Sicilian, and Nakamura has gone for the C3 variation, the Alpin. And this variation is pretty sharp. Well, Dubov, likes to mix it in the opening, and we know that, well, he's got to win this set of 4 today to stay in the match. But here it's clear that Dubov had done his homework. He is a renowned theoretician, and he'd actually played G6 against Van Forest in Vaikonzee a few months ago. But he's improved on his play and played Bishop G4. And this does look pretty pleasant for black, considering that white's development is, well, poor on the queen side at the moment. And this move, Queen E6, just about forces an endgame. And I think black is very comfortable here. This move, Knight G5, doesn't really do anything because the bishop can come to D5. So B3, it's time for white to try and bring some pieces in the game, but black is very comfortable here. So pieces exchanged, and already I think black has basically equalised here. This bishop sits on this wonderful square on D3, blocking that D pawn. So Nakamura, well, as ever, playing pretty quickly. That is his big forte. He plays really quickly and very sensibly, and often gets a huge time advantage. But Dubov, wasn't too far behind today. I think he learnt his lesson from day 1. And, well, Nakamura is obviously recovering here. He's started to get his pieces out, but that D pawn is backward. E5. So opening up this diagonal, so white exchanges bishops. And this is a really interesting decision from Hikaru Nakamura. So he's white here. It's game 1. And it's pretty clear that if he wants to try and just kind of flatten things here, then he should play knight takes pawn. And there's no doubt that after these exchanges, that black is slightly better. You can see the rook is very active. These pawns are split. But then again, it's not that bad for white. I mean, obviously white has the wrong end of a draw here. But this, with careful play, ought to be a draw. But clearly Nakamura just didn't want to go into a position where, as they say, only 2 results are possible. He couldn't win that. And now we see the measure of the man. He was prepared to play on here to keep the position complicated, but at least, give himself a chance. But after H4, well, F6 consolidates black's space advantage. You can see this D pawn is permanently backward, and really this is such an unpleasant position for white to play, because it's very difficult to drum up meaningful counterplay in this position. And Dubov just can sit there, just play these little improving moves, B6, King B7. Now he starts to swing the knight round, maybe coming in here and followed by putting the rook on D3 again. a4. Of course, if Nakamura can play a5 to get rid of that isolated a-pawn and also open lines for the rooks, then fine, he's got enough counterplay. But of course, the knight comes back to c6 to prevent a5. And now there's a nice route into c4. And this is an absolutely horrible position for white. It doesn't matter if you've got a time advantage or not. I mean, these moves were pretty simple for Dubov, and now you can see that white's pieces are completely passive. And just little improvements here for black. And now Nakamura had to decide, well, do I just sit there and do nothing, you know, switch this rook around or move the king up? Or do I go for counterplay? Well, he went for counterplay. I think it's a terrible position, really. But after this, well, Dubov hadn't compromised his position in any way. His pieces were still very active. And basically, he's just a clear pawn up and with a very nice pawn structure. And he duly did the biz and won that game after 57 moves. So the first game to Dubov. Well, the next two games, Dubov handled pretty well. 2 draws, wasn't in any trouble. Nakamura sort of failed to drum up, generate any sort of meaningful play. So they went into game 4 with Nakamura in a must-win situation. He had to win to bring this second set into an Armageddon tiebreak. And this started out as a Leningrad Dutch. Well, we can see that Hikaru, he knows he's in a must-win situation and he's prepared to mix it right from the word go. Absolutely typical of him. And he does have actually a lot of experience with the Leningrad Dutch. Of course, it's a very sharp opening. When you advance this pawn, it weakens diagonals, potentially weakens the 7th rank. But it is very aggressive, it's unbalanced, and often very non-standard positions are reached. And that's roughly what happened in this game. But, I mean, so far, actually, Hikaru playing very sensibly. Yes, it's an ambitious opening, but actually Hikaru playing very classically, putting the knight on the outpost, supported by the pawns. And already, this looks absolutely fine for black. Don't like that rook on e1. I think Dubov wanted to get in e4, but now that he hasn't, Hikaru stamped on that very quickly with his stonewall formation. Then the rook really ought to be back on f1, protecting the f2 square. And, well, I think it was Bronstein that said the Dutch would be nothing if it weren't for the dynamic play you get when you advance the g-pawn. Gain space on the king side, and because black is solid in the middle, you can get away with this flank advance. g4, pushing the knight. This was exchanged, and c6. Still pretty comfortable for black. f3 drives the knight from e4. Well, Nakamura exchanged. But there's no doubt he has the initiative here. He's ready to try to open up the h-file. Remember, Dubov just needs a draw, so he closed the position with f4. h4. Well, I don't think white is going to be mated on the h-file, but it is kind of annoying to have this pawn here. You never know whether it's going to exchange and heavy pieces come down the h-file, although it doesn't look that dangerous, or whether the pawn is going to advance to h3. And now, I thought bishop a3, followed by bishop d6, didn't look bad for white, but Dubov played c5. I think, he found himself in a bit of a dilemma. How ambitiously to play here. He knows he only needs a draw. And I think that can affect your thinking. You don't play a normal game. You know, here he's closing it, whereas, you know, bishop a3 to d6 could maybe have been more ambitious. But in fact, although this looks like it just shuts black out, in fact, black has possibilities to open the position, not just on the king side. I mean, it doesn't look that dangerous, but, you know, well, you always have to be a little bit careful. But it's on the queen side where black has prospects, and this move bishop f8 is the start of that. You can see that white doesn't really have a good plan here. And I don't get king e1 at all. If you're going to wait, I can think of better waiting moves, but listen, this is rapid play. Anything can happen, and sometimes some pretty bizarre moves are played. Thing is, the king is not going to be safe on the queen side because black is going to play b6 and possibly advance the a pawn as well. So there we go, b6, that's the start of trouble for white, because black is going to at some point exchange here and then advance the a pawn and also use the b file as well to operate on. So this is already quite tricky, and you never know whether black is going to exchange and plant the rook on h2 or whether to play h3 to inconvenience the light squared bishop. So there's some shuffling going on here, and now Dubov thinks better of it and brings the king back to f2. And here h3 from Nakamura. So obviously the bishop doesn't want to go to h1. It will never move again. So bishop f1, but this also looks a bit rough for a few moments, where now that the rook can't actually move, the bishop needs to move out, but it can't move because of the e-pawn, and the e-pawn can't move because of the queen. Well, it's a right old traffic jam. And this is the moment when Nakamura started to open up the queen side, which looks very reasonable considering the state of white's pieces here. And there's no doubt that Nakamura is taking the initiative now. Remember, he's in a must-win situation. And here, I think there's a nice idea. He played queen a3, which with hindsight, well, it looks aggressive, but actually it would have been much better to play queen b6 check. Pawn comes to e3 to block the check. The rook is attacked, and then rook b4. And then there's this very standard plan of advancing the a pawn against these two pawns here. So a standard minority attack with the a pawn. And that is going to be difficult for white to hold. And the thing is, although the position is closed here with this locked pawn chain, in fact, once the position opens up on the queen side, and if black ever breaks through, then white's king will not have any cover, and those pawns can assist in some kind of checkmating attack or even in winning an endgame. But Nakamura played queen a3. He was playing very quickly as ever. And here already white has the possibility to advance, whoops, not to e5, that would be against the rules, but to e4 to open this up. But remember, Dubov is in this dilemma. Should he open up the position and play for a win, or should he sit tight? Well, he played e3. And here Nakamura, I think, makes a fundamental mistake. Again, he played this very, very quickly. One of those moves which looks very natural, rook a5. But the problem is that rook now cannot move. Those squares are controlled by the bishop. Would have been better to go to c5. And again here, e4 looks like a golden opportunity. So, for example, if pawn takes, then, well, the d file opens up, and that looks really dubious. Once white gets pieces into play, bishop c4 and rook d1. Or perhaps bishop e2 instead, bishop e2 to not to allow a check here, bishop e2 and rook d1. But also after f takes e4, bishop e2, you can see that one drops. There's also f5 to open this up. These are the themes, and suddenly these pieces way across the other side of the board, in Siberia, I'm afraid, and the king is going to be in trouble. So let's go back. Rook a5 just played. Dubov still in a dilemma. Should he play e4? Is that too risky? Instead, he prevaricated and played bishop d3, c5. And here, yeah, I'm sure he was tempted by bishop takes pawn here, but he must have spotted that c4 covering d6 actually saves black and should be winning. So he played rook c1. So he's playing very sensibly. He's managed to bring that rook on g1 into the game before committing himself. He must have realized, well, the rook's not doing much here, so you know he can sit tight. Rook b8. And again, e4 is such a tempting move. If f takes e4, then f5 brings that queen into the game, and it looks incredibly dangerous. But bishop e2 again. So many opportunities to play like this, but in the end, he just shuffled with the bishop. And here it's quite funny after the game. Dubov said that on each turn he was wasting so much time and energy considering e4 that he just thought, okay, now's the time to do it, because let's just do it and hang the consequences. At least I won't have to calculate it again each move. And e4 is certainly not a bad move here. So once again, we've got d takes e4, rook d1 is fatal. We've got f takes e4, again f5 looks really nasty for black. That queen romps in. Queen b4 is still probably equal, but Nakamura played d4. Remember, he needs to keep as many pieces on the board, but now actually the initiative swings over to white. Bishop d3 is a strong move. And after this, in fact, it's possible to exchange already and play e6 just to open up the position. But instead, Dubov went rook e1, which looks pretty good. He's already contemplating doing exactly that, exchanging and playing e6. And Nakamura realized the danger he was in and played queen b4, heading into an endgame, which was, I'm sure, a huge relief to Dubov. Both sides, the clocks were ticking down, and Dubov, you know, running a little bit short of time. He definitely had less time than Nakamura. Was probably very relieved to see the queens come off the board. And now white is pretty safe. Well, it's not even, when I say safe, it's not only hard to lose this position, but white actually has every chance of things turning in his direction, considering that, you know, the bishop is trained on this one, the d-pawn is weak, the rook is on an open file. Well, white is basically better here, and Nakamura is scrambling. Bishop c4, that's a safe move. And here it's simply possible to take on d4, but Dubov invested a bit of time and found an ultra safe option. This forces an exchange, well, two exchanges, and white doesn't win a pawn, but he's simply able to get a very, very comfortable position where, when in fact black has to be careful here. Rook e2, and white wants to play e6 with quite possibly a winning king and pawn endgame. Maybe, but certainly a draw. So Nakamura blocks that. And now there's some shuffling. Remember, Dubov just needs a draw to win this mini match. So Hikaru had to vary. He didn't play rook e6, he played king e6, which is a bit desperate. Of course, king takes pawn, and now, well, white certainly shouldn't have any problems. Nakamura played this because he wants to bring the rook in and get it to g2. That's his last chance, but it's a pretty forlorn hope. And actually, Dubov has found a very strong idea, putting the king on d2, and now he's just going to attack that rook. You can see the black rook can't escape. The only way to escape is to play rook g2. Rook f1 would just be a draw, but that's what Dubov wants. And of course, white cannot exchange rooks. But Dubov, very clever. He just keeps that rook trapped so that if rook g1, that's fine. The rook just comes back and it's going to be a draw. So Nakamura can only shuffle here with his king. Both sides shuffled. And here, Hikaru even attempted to lose the game with king d5. He can just sit there, but after king d5, well, Dubov forced a draw. He wasn't looking for a win. In fact, there is a win here. King e3 is a rather... I'm going to show it to you. So Dubov, I should say, Dubov played e6, and the game ended in a draw. We'll look at that in a second. But king e3 is a really interesting way to win the position. So first of all, we should say that white threatens to take and play king f2 with a winning king and pawn endgame. So rook g1 is forced. And now e6, that's the point. So that if king takes pawn, then king f2 check. There's a nasty little tactic. So after e6, the rook has to chase back. And now this is one of those absolutely standard rook and pawn endgames with the rook trapped. And the king just advances with a very easy win. So Dubov missed a win with king e3, but he wasn't looking for a win. He was just content to force a draw with e6. And the rooks were exchanged. And basically, after a few more moves of shuffling back and forth, you can see there is no way in for either side. They agreed a draw. So Daniel Dubov won that set, 2.5, 1.5. So they're one set all, and they now play a deciding third set. Really entertaining chess. And I think we have two very worthy finalists. Dubov, very, very creative against Nakamura.